It occurred to me as I was putting together the notes for today's video that probably in England they say this differently, because I did an interview with a lady and we were calling it a certain kind of controversy, but she's from England, so she called it a controversy. Like, there's a completely different emphasis. It was a controversy instead of a controversy. So I say soliloquy, you might say tomato. Hey there, my name is Cassidy Cash, that's Shakespeare Girl, and this week we're taking a look at one of Shakespeare's most famous theater devices. When we ask, did Shakespeare invent the soliloquy? The short answer to this week's question is no. Shakespeare didn't invent the soliloquy. It existed long before he made it famous. However, he certainly took it and made it his own. So what is a soliloquy? Well, first of all, there are three main words in theater that get used to describe speeches by characters on stage. And that's the monologue, the soliloquy, and the aside. The monologue is when the character is giving a speech on stage and the other characters are aware that he is giving this speech. A soliloquy is where the character is having a conversation inside their head, and the audience gets to be witness to what's going on, but the other characters on stage don't know what's happening, and the character is not specifically addressing the audience. The aside is when the character is still giving a speech, but it's actually talking to the audience. In the Elizabethan era, when characters were on stage, the characters would actually ask the opinion of the audience on the progression of the action on stage. And they would say, what do you think I should do? And they would address this question to the audience, and the audience would be given the opportunity to share what they thought before watching the rest of the play progress. Now, obviously, the action of the play was already pre-decided, but the aside was included to allow the audience to participate in the action and to draw them into the production they were witnessing. The soliloquy is really not a very public speech at all. It's basically a window into the mind and thought processes of the character themselves. Now, this worked really well in Elizabethan times because there were minimal sets, and so there wasn't a lot of visual cues going on stage to let you know what the character was thinking or where he was at. And so it's really a brilliant move to take this soliloquy and allow the actor to speak what the character is thinking. Now, as we mentioned, the soliloquy existed long before Shakespeare made it famous. Some contemporaries of Shakespeare that used it before Shakespeare did include Kyd and Marlowe, who used it in plays like The Spanish Tragedy and Dr. Faustus. And these were dated as early as 1586 in the case of The Spanish Tragedy. And that is before we think before we have any evidence of Shakespeare having written anything at all. So he can't take claim for having used it first, but I think there's plenty of evidence in his body of work to suggest that he was quite innovative with the theater device. I had trouble finding what the actual very first use of a soliloquy was. I was able to find that monologues were in use in plays from the 1400s. There's a play called The Castle of Perseverance that dates to the 1400s that made use of the monologue. And there was a play from the 1500s called Everyman, which also made extensive use of the monologue. Now, according to one online etymological, I think that one's right, etymological dictionary where they trace the origin of words, linguistically, the word soliloquy dates to the 1600s, which is right when Shakespeare is penning his most famous soliloquies, like the ones that we see in Hamlet that are considered just bastions of soliloquy greatness. It's held up as like, this is the way to do this. And so I'm not sure if that's actually when the word first got used, and before that they were called monologues no matter how you applied them, or if Shakespeare just gets the credit because his went on to be so famous. That was a little unclear, and I haven't finished doing all the research into what the very first one was, but I thought it was interesting that at least one dictionary dates it to Shakespeare's time. Some of the ways that he used the soliloquy is to show how the character was wrestling with emotion. And Shakespeare wrote these soliloquies mostly in blank verse, which is unrhymed iambic pentameter. And he would actually change the rhyme and meter scheme scheme during the soliloquy to show that the character was wrestling with emotions. He would go from a high to a low and back again, and he was not sure, and then he's definitely sure, and he's mad, and now he's sad. And you can really see the character bounce around internally through the change in the rhyme scheme of these soliloquies. Can you all hear that thunder? Like, there's a massive thunderstorm. Don't you know it? There's a massive thunderstorm going on outside, probably because I hit record on this video. There are a lot of examples of great soliloquies in Shakespeare's works. We've already mentioned Hamlet, and then there's Macbeth. Macbeth is amazing because in Macbeth, you really see through the soliloquy that Macbeth himself has internal fears that he's not letting people see on the outside. So the characters on the stage are not necessarily aware of what the audience knows about Macbeth. And some of the things that you learn through the soliloquy are that he's afraid of death. He's afraid of feeling guilty. He's afraid that he's going to get caught. And he's not acknowledging his own conscience. You see through the soliloquy that he understands murder is wrong, but he's not acknowledging that that's an obstacle for him. And so you really get this window into a whole nother side of the character as an audience member that the characters on stage have no idea about. And that's the power of the soliloquy. In King Lear, Shakespeare uses it again, and that is where you learn that Brutus is this honest, upright man who is just trying to do the right thing, and his environment is just going nuts, and he can't control the environment, and it's creating just a very difficult situation for him. He's trying to do the right thing and doesn't really know what that is. And then, of course, we mentioned Hamlet as being the shining example because it allows us to witness Hamlet's inner struggle with defining who he is and just this self-examination that's really unlike what we've seen the soliloquy used for in theater up to this point. Now, there are a lot of other soliloquy examples, including some in Richard III, Henry VI, Part 3, and other places where you can witness Shakespeare's soliloquy greatness. I found an excellent paper on this topic actually by someone named James Shea. I don't know him personally, but he's from the University of Windsor, and he wrote a really great paper. It's dated from 1963, so when you pull it up, it looks like it was either actually typed on a typewriter or a really old version of Microsoft where it looks like it's been typed on a typewriter. So it's from 1963, and we've got a little bit of some old technology happening there, but the knowledge is spot on. So I will definitely link to that in today's show notes. So the answer to this week's question is no, Shakespeare did not invent the soliloquy. He just used it like no one else. It's safe to say from the body of evidence we have in his work that Shakespeare's creative and innovative approach to the soliloquy helped ensure that the legacy of this powerful theater device would live a long and glorious life on the stage. Thank you, Shakespeare. That's it for this week. My name is Cassidy Cash, that Shakespeare girl, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. Don't forget that this month, the month of September, is when the early bird tickets will go on sale for our trip to Stratford and London next year. We'll be going in September of 2019. Exactly 1 year from now, we will be going over there, and you can go with us. And at the end of this month is when early bird tickets will go on sale for that trip. Now, the reason that's awesome is because it's like £300 less than the standard ticket rate, and I am only allowed to send the purchase link for the early bird price to people who are on our email list. That's the agreement I have with the partner I've signed up with. British History Tours and I are working together, and part of our agreement is that the early bird tickets can only be given out to people who sign up for the early bird list. So if you're even thinking about going on this trip with us, you definitely want to sign up for that list, and we'll be sending out the buy link for the early bird tickets later this month. So please visit cassidycash.com/travel Shakespeare to learn more about that. And I'll see you next week.